Welcome everyone, Byron White. I'm here with Katelyn. Katelyn, are you here?
I'm here. Hi, Byron.
Hi there. Great to have you with us. Excited. So we're going to have a lot of fun today with 7 secrets to fall in love. Wait a second. I mean 7 secrets for getting the media to fall in love. Okay, got it now. But this is a big challenge for us all. And I'm very excited to hear your angle on this and your insights that I think are counterintuitive in many cases. So I'm excited to see your presentations today, and I will of course have lots of questions for you as I always do. But we want to encourage people to ask questions today using the prompts within GoToWebinar. So fire in your questions. If a radical, fascinating, interesting question pops up on the screen, I'll either A, hold it till the end, or B, ask it right away and interrupt Katelyn even though she may be on a roll. Let's go through just a few logistics for today. The good news is this webinar is being recorded and will be off to the races to get a distribution and a link to the recording out to all of the guests. So thanks for that opportunity to see us live or see us post live, I guess you'd say. And as mentioned, please ask questions. It helps us show A, you're engaged, B, you're interested in the topics, and C, you're having fun and thinking, which is a good thing. Finally, we've got lots of social activity happening. Joseph is here with us and is going to be tweeting out along the way. You can show us your love by using the # right on. You can tweet me and Katelyn directly at her and my email address of our handles at Twitter. So we're super excited to have you along with us today. Let's take a look. Everyone sort of knows me. I'll just pop a few good pieces of data for you about Writer Access that I'm very excited to announce. Number 1 and number 2, for that matter, we have new versions of our mobile app coming out. Number 1 for iOS and number 2 for Android. Those should hit the market next week. And I have to tell you, this has been like a, I don't know, 6 or 8 month long journey to get these to get the mobile app for Writer Access in the works. It began with literally a tear-jerking conversation with one of our customers and one of our writers, which happened a couple days apart, where we began explaining the vision of where we were trying to go with a mobile app development and making it easy to manage the workflow and place orders and even complete orders. And literally these customers and the writer said, wow, if you can make that happen, you have no idea how it will change my life. It's just crazy to even think about. So hopefully you'll all enjoy that benefit. We believe that creating content and or editing it and or managing it should be something you can do on the fly when you're orbiting at high speeds. I don't want to suggest that we'll become the Uber of content management and ordering content with freelance writers, but it'd be a nice dream to have if more people were ordering great content and having it published and created using our technology. The other big news is we've signed our contract, which is where Katelyn and I began actually, a good segue in. We've signed a contract to return to the Westin on the waterfront on May 2nd through the 4th. For a content marketing conference. Very excited about that. We'll have a bigger venue this year. We're targeting more like 600 people this year. So we've taken over the huge Jumbotron space in the Westin downstairs, which will consume very large space, about probably 2 to 3 times the amount of space we had this year. Although this year was actually great. We took over a whole floor at the Westin. It was a great experience for us all. But we're bigger and better and more bold. We have a new theme launching on the CMC site probably by next week, and we'll start recruiting speakers with a very interesting theme this year. And I'll share it with you now so you can start to get excited about it. We're calling it, you know, of course last year our theme was sort of the superhero theme and fortifying your smartitude, and that was a great fun theme. We had a lot of positive energy on that and fantastic promotion. This year we're going to dive a little bit deeper with a theme that we've developed called the art of content creation and the science of marketing performance. So it's going to be an art and science theme. I'll let your imaginations run wild. But today, more importantly, way more importantly, we want to focus on Katelyn, and we're going to turn things over to Katelyn. You can connect with her there. She'll tell you a little bit about herself. This is, of course, a final screen. You can reach me in a number of different places, but I'll pop it up on the screen there. But without further ado, kaboom, I'm headed over to Katelyn. So give me about 1 second here, and I'll make the switch. Here we go. Kaboom. Take it away, Katelyn.
Excellent. Can you see my screen?
I can indeed.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Byron, for that introduction. And it's interesting that you brought up the Content Marketing Conference, because I think what we heard and saw there was really the inspiration for the webinar today. In talking with folks both on the floor and on the session that I led, it really became clear that a lot of people want to do more to amplify their content and to take advantage of media, but that there's a little bit of confusion and skepticism and concern about how to go about doing it. So maybe as you think about the agenda for next year's event, maybe there's the art and the science, but there's also a little bit of magic that goes into PR. So that's what we're here to cover today, help everyone attending make sense of that. We'll share the secrets that we get paid by our clients to address day to day. So just quickly on myself and on V2, we are a PR and content agency in Boston, just down the street from Byron and his team at Writers Access. We've been around for about 10 years. We work with disruptive brands in all types of industries, from higher education to high tech and everything in between. So my background and the perspective I'm bringing today is really as a PR practitioner who's fallen into content in a wonderful way as the media landscapes evolved, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Before we dive too far in, diving too far in already. Definitely take to Twitter. Would love to see what everyone has to say about today's session. If there's sound bites that you think are helpful to you, share that with your followers. Libby from the V2 marketing team is here with me live tweeting away for the person, or maybe a few of you, with a lot of Twitter activity using hashtag #WriteOn and our handle at V2Comms. We'll be giving away several hours of free consulting on your PR and content strategy. So really digging a layer deeper on today's webinar and helping you with some personalized, direct consulting support. So get on, tweet. Libby's watching, and I know Byron and his team are also following. Again, hashtag #WriteOn. It's on all the slides. So I mentioned that the media landscape is changing, and that's really, I think, a big factor influencing the rise of content marketing and really changing the way folks think about getting in front of potential consumers or customers. So newspaper circulation is just plummeting. This year, circulation is in its 28th consecutive year of decline. I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call that were not alive 28 years ago. And it's actually at their lowest levels since 1945 for Sunday newspaper circulation. That's when FDR was president, and I'm willing to bet most of the people on this webinar were not alive then. And I think there's a lot of buzz around newspapers dying, and people think of digital sites and websites kind of taking the place of that. But interestingly, Neiman Labs found that digital-only sites are also struggling. For every one digital journalist or blogger reporter, there's 4 newspaper journalists. So things are a little bit in dire straits for the press as we know it. The one optimistic piece of news is that subscriptions for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal were actually up in 2016 for the first time in forever for those 2 particular outlets, thanks to the political landscape and the election. So we'll see if that continues and if it extends elsewhere, but for the most part, there's a lot of bad news coming out of news today and media today. But the good news for everyone on this call is that content marketing is thriving. So Part of that has to do with how consumers and customers are buying. They're looking online before making an offline purchase. Forrester found that 74% of folks do at least half of their research online. And because of that, money is pouring into search, display, social, email, all channels that definitely are fueled by content. We'll all on this call and with our colleagues spend over $103 billion in about a year and a half from now. That's crazy. And that's actually more than broadcast and cable television advertising combined. So if you think about the death of the media, it's not just the poor print newspapers that we receive in the morning. It's also the TV that we watch. For B2B, when you look at content marketing, numbers are on the up and up. The Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs, they do their annual study, and for B2B, and the numbers weren't that much different for B2C, spending is going to go up. The commitment to marketing, most people are very or extremely committed. And for the few folks that are no longer or that aren't yet doing content marketing, they plan to. So it's only going to get more important and a more important part of the marketing mix, which if you're on this call, you probably already are bought into this idea here. So what? So the media need more help than ever. It was interesting. A few years ago now, I was talking to a journalist who at the time was at TechCrunch. She's now, I think, at the New York Times, but she introduced a term to me called churnalism. And what she meant by that was that she needed to churn out at least 4 stories a day. She was looking to just constantly, or her editors were looking to just constantly get new material up on the website. So every time a visitor came, they had something new to see. It's extremely competitive, but it forced her to really lighten her load in terms of what she could post and getting more help doing her work, which with a low budget, as many newsrooms have today, required a little bit of help. So that's what the media is up against. They need a lot of content, they need it fast, and they don't have a lot of resources to do it. Even the New York Times, I mentioned them as the bright spot, but they just had a big round of buyouts. They're eliminating their public editor position because reader comments are so important now. So they need us as content marketers. They also need us as consumers and commenters on their news. So that's a great opportunity, but it's hard to stand out. There's so much noise. There's, hundreds of people registered for this webinar today. You're going to learn some great tips. You're hopefully going to go out and apply them. That's that many more people out trying to get their content in front of the press. Today, interestingly, there's 5 PR people for every reporter. That's double the rate of a decade ago, and it means it's really freaking hard to cut through the noise. Journalists are getting hundreds, if not thousands, of emails a day. Yours needs to stand out. We'll give you some tips for how to do that, but it puts everyone on this call that's trying to get their content on in a bit of a precarious position. You need to kind of bridge that gap between giving the media the material you want and also still reaching your goals of getting eyeballs on content, getting leads into your funnel, and juggling your bandwidth and time in terms of creation and then distribution and amplification. So these numbers on this slide here are hot off the press. Libby here may be upset with me that I'm promoting them before we've fully vetted them, so don't hold me 100% to these numbers. But we asked a mix of marketing functions, including PR, content, CMO level types. So it was a wide range across a number of industries to kind of give us their thoughts on the coming together of PR and content. And what we learned is it's hard, right? Less than half of folks we spoke with or we surveyed are using earned media channels today. Almost everyone is using their website. Heavy majority are using email, but earned media is kind of this untapped channel. And again, it's kind of that, it's hard, it's confusing, and I think that's probably part of the reason people are straying from it. We'll find that out once we suss the numbers out a little bit more. 42% believe their organization don't realize the value of content, the maximum value from it. There's more they can be doing. So much effort and energy goes into the development of content, it's almost silly leaving money on the table not to then promote it and amplify it. And a very similar amount believe that their organization would benefit from one entity, whether it's an agency or an in-house body, handling creation and amplification. Right now in a lot of organizations that happens in two separate groups or two separate teams, or sometimes one or the other happens, but they don't necessarily both happen. So stay tuned for more from this research. We're going to be rolling it out in the next, hopefully, couple of weeks, but just a little teaser that just shows how challenging it can be to bridge this gap. So without further ado, we're going to jump into some really practical, I hope, tactical tips. We have 7 of them, and if you all behave and pay attention, there's an 8th one at the end if you're still with us. So it really all starts with the creation of your content. And if you're on this webinar, you probably have some good best practices there around creating content that engages your audiences. And I would say that if part of your mission is to create content that engages the media, it needs to be truly, truly, truly original and often research-based. So what do we mean by that? Have something new or provocative to say. If you are writing about a topic that's been widely covered, you need to make sure you have a unique slant or angle. And if you're going to have a similar angle to what's already out there, it needs to be, at the very least, provocative. For the journalists specifically, they love data. When there's numbers that can back up a theme or an assumption, that's going to be far more compelling to them than a company just making a bold statement. This can take the form of a few different things. It could be original research, so that might be a survey that gets conducted. It might be an analyst firm that you engage to do some research for you, but something that's new and hasn't existed before. There's also a lot of companies that are sitting on interesting data within their organization, so you may not need to go out and create new research. You might be able to look at numbers of your user base, and we'll talk about an example of one company that does really good, interesting content work and media work with the data that they sit on in their business. You can also curate it from external sources. So there's a lot of government data that exists. There's a lot of existing research on some topics. If you can combine that, curate it, breathe new life into it, provide some kind of new interesting analysis, that's another way to have power in numbers, if you will. There's also tremendous opportunity to tap influencers to give your content boost and interest among press. It's one thing for a journalist to receive a piece of content that has your company's individual perspective. It's far more powerful and interesting if you have a number of folks within your industry contributing to that ebook or white paper. And if a number of perspectives are included, the editor is more likely to think it's not just you overtly promoting your product or service. I think the important thing to know as you think about original content and creating this interesting, original, data-driven content is some of it will not be media friendly. So from this point on, I think the barrier is knowing that not every piece is going to be media friendly. It has to have some of the qualities that we're going to talk about in terms of originality, timeliness, and it's okay. You have presumably other channels, email, website, social, where you're going to promote your content. If it's thought leadership oriented, that is, it's not actually selling your solution or your service, that's the biggest barrier to start with. So I mentioned there's a company that does really interesting work with data to drive press, and that's a company named Panjiva. They're a B2B company headquartered out of New York, and they track global trade shipments, what's coming into and out of the U.S. And they use that data in a really, really unique way. They, every morning, issue what I would like to refer to as the skim for global trade. It's a roundup of top stories, always grounded in the data that they sit on. You can see on the left is kind of the email that goes out. In the middle is an example of one of the stories. and then they pitch that material out to journalists, and they give journalists the opportunity to sign up for the newsletter for free. It's a paid service for some subscribers. Then they also accept inbound inquiries if journalists have questions on some of the material in that daily newsletter. So what they've seen is that trade press like Freight Business Journal here really like the content that's in the weeds numbers, but it's also opened opportunities for the executives from the company to provide thought leadership and commentary behind the numbers. So sometimes what's in this daily news report prompts broader conversations. And if you go to Panjiva's press page, you can see that their data and the content created from their data has gotten them tremendous press coverage in the Journal, the New York Times, Associated Press, and then a number of the trade press to cover the global trade and supply chain space. So tremendous inspiration from this company here if you're looking for original content that the media will pick up on. The next tip is one that I consider obvious, but sometimes when we bring it up to clients, they have that kind of like, oh, duh moment. We should have been doing this all the time. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually really easy. So what I mean by create two versions is have one version that may have heavy branding, your logo, details on your product or your company in it, and then create one version that is very, very lightly branded and may just have a source, your organization at the bottom. You don't need to start from scratch. That's the important thing to remember. You can create the content as you would for your lead nurture or lead gen program, and then if you have a even remotely savvy designer, they can probably just cut that out, shorten it, but think about making it so that your brand doesn't come through extremely heavy. The journalists and media that we work with get really turned off by a piece of content that looks like sales and marketing material. So that's really the distinction you want to make here. The other thing to think about is if there's old content that you can make subtle changes to in order to breathe new life into it, and it might just be not just removing the branding, but also updating it for current times. So we have one client that every year they issue a summer reading list. They're in the higher education space, and it's really just the same content. They swap in or out one or two new books. They take their logo and make it more subtle. That allows us to place it with the media because it's a value-add piece of content without the sell of their organization on it.
Katie, I want to ask you a question. There's obviously tension between my content that typically features my brand name and my logo versus media content. How do you bridge the gap between the two? How do you create content that just plain does not look like it's brand promotional? Can you understand that fundamental variation? And why would the media be interested in your branded content? How do you write that from scratch, knowing that you need to create a content asset that does not reek of your brand?
Yeah. So I think that that question ties back to one of the fundamentals, I believe, of content marketing, which is that you can't, in most cases, develop content that is an ad. You want to have something interesting and valuable to say. You want to inform or educate your readers or, prompt them to take some kind of action that in many cases goes beyond, clicking to a product page. Now, is that a byproduct? Of course, but that's ultimately the goal with a media asset as well. So I think making sure that the content, whether it's meant for your lead nurture stream or for the media, is adding value in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's what someone who goes to your website is looking for in many cases, but it's also something that the press are looking for. What are their readers going to get out of the content that you create for them? Does that answer your question, Byron?
It does. Don't worry, I'll have 100 more, but keep going. That's
great. They're very welcome. But I think you actually led into what what the final bullet here says, which is you need to be comfortable giving away your material. We have a lot of clients who embrace the idea of using their content for media relations programs, and then they're like, well, this is behind a lead gen form. We need to make sure we capture their information, and if you want to really do well with your content and placing it in the press, you have to be comfortable with the branding being lighter, with there being no form for people to fill out. You get what you don't get in tangible, prospecting information, you get in broader awareness. It's people reading that article on the Huffington Post that may not have heard of your brand, or in a trade publication that may not have heard of your brand, and who now say, oh gosh, I've heard of insert company X because I read about them in this trade publication. So I think you have to be open to breaking the rules that you're probably used to in a traditional content marketing program. Acme Packet is a company that no longer exists. They were acquired a few years ago, but they were among our first clients to really embrace this concept of creating two assets. So when the London Olympics took place, we developed this infographic all about the future and past of communications at the Olympics. They worked in the networking infrastructure space. We had a beautiful non-branded version that we pitched exclusively to Mashable. They ran it. It got over 1,000 shares. A bunch of other sites picked it up since Mashable is one of the more influential media sites or blogs. But they also created one that had their branding all over it, that promoted their website and their services, and that went into their kind of lead nurture stream email. They posted it on their blog. They also, which I loved, got it printed on a pop-up event banner. And so for the months leading up to, and I think immediately following the summer when they had trade shows, they brought it with them, and it was just an additional point of interest. But for the media, we had a version that was definitely more about the actual content than promoting the brand. Though I will say we did have a quote in the story that set up the infographic, so we still got the name of the company in there. We still got a link back to their website. Just because you're taking the branding off of the asset doesn't mean your brand isn't going to get included in the ultimate story that would run. So here's where things start to go a little awry for some companies, and that's targeting only relevant media. This is, I think, when you think about PR, it's one of those areas that gives people a lot of concern and pause. You don't want to be sending out mass emails to a number of journalists. PR kind of gets a really bad rap for being bothersome and irrelevant, and it's because people do not target only relevant media. So in order to do this successfully, a few things. Start with researching what the media that you want to be published in cover, and I would argue it's almost more importantly to read them and understand what they don't cover. One of the worst things you can do is send a journalist a pitch on a topic that they would never write about. So you do need to do your due diligence, read up on their beats, and think critically about the type of story they would write and if your content really has a fit there. A lot of companies might say, oh, I want to be in, entrepreneur, but their content is so specific to a particular vertical or industry that it really doesn't make sense to be in a mainstream outlet like that, even though it has a lot of eyeballs. It might be better suited for a trade publication or blog. In pitching the press, you also want to focus less on the asset and more on what the asset says. What are the readers going to get out of it? What's the point? What are they going to learn? No journalist or editor cares about your ebook. They care about the content within the ebook or whatever other asset you have. So when it comes time to pitch, the not so obvious advice, use the correct name. I'll tell you in a minute why that's important. You want to keep your pitch short and sweet, a few sentences. Make the ask very clear so the journalist understands what you want them to do. Are you asking them to run a byline article based on material from an asset? Are you asking for a conversation and you have the asset as a proof point that you know what you're talking about? You know, you need to make sure that you're doing their job for them a little bit and not asking them to kind of read between the lines of what you want done. And don't send attachments. Journalists hate that. It's, I think, one of the biggest pet peeves. And in many cases, they'll just delete the email unless they've asked for it, in which case, of course, you can send that through PDF, JPEG, you know, a link if it makes sense. Do not make a journalist fill out a form to get the asset. You need to send them the actual piece itself or a link to where it lives where they don't need to fill out a form. And get ready to hear no or to hear nothing. You're going to get rejected. And sometimes you won't even know you're getting rejected because you won't hear back. These journalists get a ton of pitches every day. They can't reply to everyone. It's appropriate to follow up, but you don't want to hound someone until they ultimately get really ticked off. So with that in mind, here's some examples of good, bad, and ugly, I guess you could say. The pitch on the left here, I don't know who it's from. Luckily, it's not us. Whenever a journalist posts these pitches online, the PR people cringe because you're like, oh, I'm so glad that's not me. And no one here would ever send a pitch like this one, which is really kind of bad. I mean, it's short, so that's good, but it doesn't give any detail into why the infographic is interesting, helpful, what value the readers will get out of it. It really doesn't even give any reason around timeliness. You know, was winter flooding happening where this outlet was based? Presumably, but I think this person pitching this should have given a little bit more setup and why it would matter to the readers. On the right, you heard me joking that you need to use the right name. This happens all the time. You always see journalists tweeting about how they get upset when people pitch them without the accurate name, or with a form email where it just says, hi, name. I mean, if you're part of a email marketing team, you've probably had that moment of crisis where you realize folks got an email without the personalization. Journalists feel the same way. They don't want to be part of a list of 800 people that you're mass mailing. And then Josh Steinley posted this final piece on the bottom about a pitch he received. And again, I think this is a great example of not making clear the ask and kind of misunderstanding how to work with press. You know, this guy says, I'm expecting your help in this. It's really presumptive and kind of a jerk thing to say. When you're pitching the press, you really want to show how you can help them and add value to their readers. And if you have not yet listened to Josh's webinar with Byron and Writer Access, and you're interested in understanding the connection between media and content, definitely take the time to listen to it. Josh is great, and his webinar with Byron is really helpful, so check that out. The next thing to keep in mind is giving advanced access or exclusivity, and basically what that means is you want to make sure you have appropriate runway for journalists and editors to take advantage of the content you have. So start with reaching out before content publishes. Even though your readership may not be tremendous on your company's blog or your resources page, journalists don't like to, in many cases, publish material that's already appeared somewhere publicly. And this is particularly true of the business press. They want some kind of first access to it. It's also really important as it relates to that to understand a publication's news cycles. So some and many sites today post material in real time throughout the day, but there are some, if there's a print publication deadline, you know, they need weeks, if not months of runway. For others, they might send out a daily newsletter at 6 or 7 a.m. and if they get your content at 9:30 and want to run it that day because it's really timely, it just doesn't work. So you need to be smart about when you're pitching as it relates to how that particular publication or website works. This third point is really, really important. You need to be clear if you're giving media outlet, advanced or embargoed access, or exclusive access. So an advance or embargo is a pitch that you would make saying, this piece of content is going out next Tuesday. We can give it to you in advance if you would like to look at it, if you would like to, pull material from it for a story, if you would like to publish it. This is the date at which it's going to go live. An exclusive is you are pitching it to one journalist and one journalist only. And if they say, yes, we want to run with this exclusively, you can't pitch it elsewhere until their story runs. There is nothing worse, maybe not nothing, but there's very few things that are worse to a journalist than thinking they have an exclusive and then seeing 3 or 4 other publications, especially their competitors, run the same piece. So that's a really important one that doesn't come through in the bullets, but be very mindful if you want to go down the path of offering an exclusive or an embargoed piece of content. And I think it's also clear at the outset to set expectations around what you want in terms of the timing I just mentioned. If you're expecting a link inclusion, whether it's back to a landing page, whether it's to your general homepage of your website. Most publications today, with the exception of a few of the top-tier business press, are open to including links, and they're very open to you providing your preferred link. But once a story publishes, it's hard to go back and ask for those edits. So just make all of that really clear up front. So much of these interactions with press today happen over email, but I will continue till the day I die to recommend picking up the phone and having a conversation, especially if a journalist has already expressed interest. It's much easier, and you can make things particularly clear. But avoid any last-minute or post-publication edits. So this goes down to before you pitch the journalist, making sure your content is finalized, that there's no edits, that every person that needs to bless and approve a piece of content has done so. We've had a few clients who have published a piece of content and then realized, oh, this number is off, or we really wanted to say this word instead of that word. And journalists just aren't open to making edits after the fact. There's often CMS systems involved that are paying for them to work with. In some cases, they're on to their 3 or 4 stories later, and they can't be bothered to go back. So avoid that headache. Have your T's crossed and your I's dotted before you reach out to avoid any headaches and disrupting a relationship with a journalist after the fact. So one example, if you are in the content marketing space, you may be familiar with a company called Curata. We helped launch them from a PR perspective back in 2011, and we used their first ever B2B marketing, content marketing survey as a vehicle to build brand awareness. And one of our remits was to help get folks into their lead gen funnel. So we negotiated an exclusive story with this guest writer for Entrepreneur Magazine. And it's hard to see based on this particular image, but it linked back to the, the download page where folks could, one, it got them back on the website, but 2, they could download the full report. So this story was a vehicle to get traffic back to their forum, get leads into their funnel, and over the course of, months later, they ended up getting subsequent pieces of content. So we had to give away what was in the report, or a lot of what was in the report, but it ultimately did drive folks back to the material. And because we gave it to Entrepreneur exclusively, it got us into a higher tier outlet than if we were to pitch it broadly to a number of outlets. Entrepreneur agreed because they were going to get to break it first. So one of the other keys, I think...
Katie, quick question for you on that Curata piece. How did you pitch that piece to the media? Could you walk us through what that looked like?
Yeah, so we had obviously the findings, and we knew based on the asset that you see there on the left, the key messages that we wanted to get across. And at this point, it was 2011. Content marketing was new. It was still kind of confusing. People were trying to make heads or tails of if it would be a big thing, if you will. So we used that as our hook, that this survey proved that content marketing was going to be a mainstay in B2B marketing. So we had a long list of outlets that we were going to target: the business press, marketing trade publications, so things like Marketing Profs, DM News, all of those kinds of outlets that marketers read, a host of blogs, and then some vertical sites that mattered to this particular company. And in looking at that list, we had two options. It was we could pitch this very broadly and tell, those dozens of outlets and journalists that this particular survey was going to go live on such and such a date, and they were, would love to set them up with the CEO of this client to talk about the results and what they meant for the market. Or we could go exclusively, which we thought, and I think it worked, would allow us to get a higher tier publication. And we knew that once this story ran, we could go to all of those other dozens of publications. So that's what we did. We reached out just to Mikhail. We asked him if he would want this data exclusively. And in order for us to give it to him exclusively, he had to agree to, and I forget the exact terms, but essentially run it on the date that we were planning to launch our email marketing campaign, and include a link back to the landing page where folks could download the full report. And he agreed. He ended up interviewing the CEO. We gave him the full report in advance, of course, so he could inform his story. And that's really how it all came to life.
Did you have a relationship with Mikhail, or did you just break right in and say, hey, he's a writer on this content marketing topic, or how did that work? And was there a legal document signed for the exclusivity, or was it?
So we did not have a relationship with Mikhail when we pitched this particular story, but he did have his beat, and I'm using that term loosely because he was a guest writer, but what he regularly wrote about as a guest writer was marketing. So that was our tie-in when we pitched him. It was, based on your coverage of the marketing landscape, we have this survey we think you and entrepreneurs readers would be interested in. So that was the setup.
And how many other publications did you go to, or did you just start with one and then hang on and then go to the next?
Start with one. So if you're going to offer an exclusive, you need to unfortunately go one by one by one, and you typically need to wait until you hear back from the person you pitched exclusively. The way we manage that is we typically give someone a deadline and say something to the effect of, hey, Mikhail, would love to give this to you exclusively. If you can let us know by tomorrow at 5 p.m. or Friday before the end of the day, if you're not interested, would like to just have the opportunity to offer it elsewhere. Journalists get that all the time. They understand. And we usually recommend giving a short time frame so that you're not stuck delaying the launch of your asset if you're not hearing back from a journalist, because many times you won't. In regards to your question about a legal document, no. No legal documents signed. What we always recommend is just getting the details in writing. So even if you call the editor or journalist and have a discussion around, okay, you're going to publish it on this date, you're going to have a link, like if you hash all that out over the phone, just send a follow-up email very quickly saying, thanks, Mikhail, for your time. As we just discussed, here's the time, here's the link we want you to include, here's the spokesperson's title and the spelling of their name, whatever details you guys go through, get all of that in writing, because we found that to be a good safety net if things ever go awry.
One of our fans and attendees, thank you very much, asked a question, and that was, do you tell the journalist the hook before they agree to have the exclusive? In other words, what are you giving them, as part of your pitch?
So in the case of something like this where there's like a survey or there's data involved, We typically tease some of the numbers. So what are the most interesting findings? We try not to give away everything because we want them to kind of engage and learn more, and we then have the opportunity to have the conversation with them around like the in the weeds details that they may find interesting, but like in the spirit of keeping the pitch short, it's usually, it's usually just what numbers are interesting, or if it's not a numbers-based piece, it's what trend does it tie to? Why is this content asset particularly timely?
Got it. Very cool.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue. So I think being timely is really important. If you have a piece of content or can create a piece of content that hooks to your narrative and is aligned with current events, you're going to have a much higher success with media. The difference between traditional content marketing and content marketing that works well for media is that it has something to do with what's happening in the market or the sector that the journalist or the outlet covers. You need to act fast. In most cases, that means within hours or days. For some organizations, that's not possible. But for just even this morning, we had, when the CEO of Uber stepped down, we had a number of clients giving us some material that we could work into blog posts, into commentary to get out to the press. And conversations have already happened. Within 3 or 4 hours of that news breaking, we had clients on the phone with Bloomberg talking about the implication. So this is the type of thing, if you really want to be successful aligning with a timely subject matter, you need to hop to. Some subject matters are a little bit, longer lead. All things related to the Affordable Care Act, for example. That's been a hot topic for way more than 6+ months now. So there's an opportunity to create a piece of content that's going to have longer legs. Again, as with most of these tips, it comes down to promoting your ideas and expertise, not selling your products. So you don't want to talk about your, benefits offering when you're weighing in on the ACA. You want to talk more around why a particular element of the Affordable Care Act is good or bad, or what risks it presents to your particular audience. One thing that we always caution clients around as it relates to aligning with timely news subjects is ambulance chasing. So if something awful happens where you have a perspective or a point of view or a relevant solution, you just want to temper that with you want to temper the opportunity with the risk of exploiting a tragedy. And a great example of this is we worked with a company that had a tool for managing anxiety and managing fear. So when all of these awful terrorist attacks happen, obviously fear and anxieties are running really high. So how do you, and we've had to help them navigate taking advantage of, there being this sentiment in the public with coming off as wanting to sell their product. And the way we did that was more around offering tips for managing fear after one of these happens. So what do you do to cope when all you're seeing on the news is tragedy? So it's a delicate balance. The lines are not black and white, but you don't want to be that person pitching your product when people are hurt or dying or there's some real tragedy. So I mentioned the Affordable Care Act. This is one of our clients' direct path. They developed an ebook which has gotten several months of media material before the election happened. Material from the ebook was used to pitch kind of outlooks on the election. As recently as the end of February, we pulled content from that for pieces for HR Dive. So as I mentioned, some stuff you need to act within minutes. Other stuff, is longer lead. You need to understand what the news cycle is. And as experts in your given markets, you know that best, if it's going to be a quick pop or if it's going to be something that's going to be buzzed about for months or sometimes even years. Think beyond on the asset. So don't rely just on a blog post or an ebook or an infographic or a video to drive media. The reverse can be true. So sometimes a topic comes up and it's really interesting and you're like, oh God, I have to do this whole big campaign on this topic. Suss it out with the press first. Pitch a media person with your point of view, offering a conversation on something that might be a germ of an idea for an ebook. Forcing your hand to have that conversation with the journalist can sometimes be a treasure trove of material to then go on and create that asset. You know, depending on your role of folks listening on this call, you might sit on a conversation that a subject matter expert has with the journalist, and just by taking notes and transcribing the conversation, you're going to quickly have, you know, material for 2 or 3 blog posts and a bigger hub asset that it could roll up to. So don't rely just on content to fuel your media efforts. Sometimes the reverse can be true. You know, you have to be agile, you have to be flexible, you have to kind of break your existing process if one exists, but the output tends to be really good. The challenge for those of you in a traditional content marketing role, or for some of you, is just forgetting links and leads for now. Let the journalist or the media outlet tell its story, and view this approach as an opportunity to get the material you need to develop the content that's going to get you those leads. This is more about original editorial and reverse engineering the process a little bit. So we worked on a really cool project that I think followed this reverse engineering process. A client named Simplivity, there was infrastructure technology company in Westborough, Massachusetts. They had the opportunity to contribute to the storyline in the HBO Silicon Valley show. So the team worked very closely with the prop master and the writers, and the storyline of season 3, which if you watch the show is all about a box, infrastructure box. They informed all of that. So we pitched stories to the business press and trade press all about their involvement in the plot line for the season, and of course in the technology world that show is particularly interesting and hot. So all of those stories ultimately ended up being the lead for what ended up being a blog post. They sent out swag bags, there were contests, but the campaign really, beyond the show itself, it really kicked off with the media stories, which if you look at the Business Insider story there and then the blog posted the same day, it was really the media story and the interviews that went into that informed the blog post. So it was a little bit backwards, but it worked in this particular case. The Business Insider and Recode and some of the other outlets that wrote about this probably wouldn't have covered it if they saw the blog go up first. The natural next and final step is to promote the heck out of that content. So you and the media have the same goal ultimately at the end of the day. It's all about eyeballs, it's about visitors, it's about getting people to engage with your content. So they're a partner in doing that. You want folks to get onto your lead gen list or engage with your brand. They want people to engage with their material. So use social, use email, use all the same channels you use for your original content that you create, and just plug the media content into that process. You always want to give credit to the journalist and or editor and the outlet in your promotion. You know, this story first appeared on wherever, or to read, you know, introduce just the first sentence or two of the article and then say to read the full piece, and then you link back to it. And this is really not a job that should fall solely on you as content creators or the PR team or even the marketing team. Everyone in the organization should have a hand in this process. So One company that did really well at engaging the entire organization was Net Prospects. So every time they got a piece of coverage or when they had important company news, they had a newsletter, you could call it, called Go Buzz Yourself. It was catchy, it was fun. They were all serialized with a number so people could keep track of them, but they made it really dummy-proof for everyone in the company to promote it. All you had to do was click on those 3 hyperlinks for Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. The marketing person there had a tweet or a Facebook post or a LinkedIn post already populated. It had all of the right tags and hashtags and @ symbols in there. In some cases there were images, but you can only imagine the power for the journalist on the other side who has no marketing support or very little marketing support to see a 50 or 100 or multiple hundreds of people from the organization getting that out on their own channels. It helps them, it helps you, it's really a win-win. You can see some tweets that I've done to promote one of our clients at the Michigan Ross Business School, and then one of the research analysts at Panjiva, who I mentioned at the top of the call, when they got a story in the AP, you can see he tagged Panjiva, he tagged the journalists, he tags the outlet. That's really what you want to do, like show the love. So those are all of the official tips. One bonus tip, this is a not-so-secret secret to our success, a tool that we all use here at V2, and I know PR people love it. It's called Haro, Help a Reporter Out. It's free. It's a big, long email. You can see it there that gets issued 3 times a day. And it's all stories that journalists are working on. And they lay out the outlet, the name of the reporter, their deadline, and then specifically what they need for their story. Sometimes they're looking for commentary. Sometimes they're looking to talk to non-vendors. So they're looking to talk to like your average consumer about, you name it. It's a little bit of everything. But in many cases, there are what I would call softballs for pitch opportunities. You know exactly what they're looking for. In this particular case, they want to talk about surveys on vitamins. If you are on this call, the deadline was last night, but you should find this reporter's name, because if you have content on this, all you have to do is send it, hey, Katie, we just issued this report on the negative effects of vitamins for men, thought you'd be interested, would you like to see the whole asset? More likely than not, they'll come back and say yes, because it's relevant, it's timely, it's something that they're working on, and it's a win-win for both sides. So the one caveat, and if you go to Haro's site to sign up, they say this all over the place, is don't pitch irrelevantly. If you see a journalist for a particular publication writing about topic X, don't go and pitch them on something totally irrelevant. Haro will cut you off and limit your access to the server, but this whole service is amazing, and it's the secret to a lot of our media success. Very quickly, because we're coming up on time, a few things to remember. You and the media and us here at V2 and all of your PR agencies, we're all in the same boat. We all need help, but you got to be relevant. You got to think about new ways to slice and dice content, and there ultimately needs to be a value exchange. We're giving something to the media. They're hopefully giving something back to us by exposing our content to their audiences. Help is there. I know one really good agency who can help you. There's plenty out there. Look for one that do both content and PR, because they'll understand both sides of the house. And that's one of the values we bring to our clients at V2. But there's plenty of great agencies out there. If you're looking for a little bit more information on media, this link here, which will also be in the recorded version, we have our media tip sheet. So that could be another helpful asset to you. And of course, I'm happy to answer questions. Our website is there if you want to check out a little bit more about V2 and what we do. And if you need to hop off, because I know we're approaching 2 o'clock, my email address is there, and you're welcome to email me directly.
Fantastic presentation, Katelyn. Really great stuff. I'm going to field some questions now, and there's one coming in that I want to get to. The first is from Lewis. Thanks very much. Here it is. From a public relations perspective, you want as much exposure as possible for your business. How do you determine the frequency of using embargo advance versus exclusivity for your media sources?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer is you're not always going to use embargoes and exclusives. In fact, I would argue that, and I'm glad this question is being asked because I think it's an important distinction that I took for granted. Those are best utilized for content that is particularly timely and new. And by that I mean things that might have research behind them, that might be more than just a commentary piece or an infographic. Most outlets will not necessarily say, oh my gosh, if the company posts this this blog post at 7 o'clock and I get my story out at 10, I'm late to the party. I think it's more when there's research involved, or of course if there's news, but in most cases I think content marketing materials don't include hard news. So if you do have a lot of research, and I think of companies like Panjiva's one, and there's presumably a lot of other ones out there, like, you know, Uber, they're probably a bad example to use today, but companies that share like usage data. I think you want to think about the goal that you want to achieve to decide if you want to get national business press. Exclusive is probably the way to go just because they're that much more competitive. I think if you're looking for broad-based coverage where you want to hit a lot of outlets and make sure you make a big splash all on the same day, I think advanced is the way to go. So that is a very long way of saying it depends. I think you need to think about your goals. I think you need to think about the ideal publications you want to be in. And I think you need to think about if your news is, or your content is worthy enough and interesting enough to get it out in advance and give journalists the time to write the story, or whether they're going to be just as comfortable writing a piece, you know, on their own time, if you will, or on their own timeline.
Katelyn, only time for a few more questions, so shoot a few more at us if you want, but here's one I'm going to take right now from Karen. Thank you, Karen. Can you talk later more about how to tap influencers to give your content credibility?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're getting it a lot more. I would say in the past year and a half, the number of companies we're hearing from saying, how do we do influencer relations? What's that like? I don't know what the exact number is, but it's gone up a lot. So the best practices are still coming together, in my opinion. I think the differences to be mindful of between media and influencer relations are that influencers in many cases are not, in fact in most cases, are not trained journalists. They don't have the same understanding of off-the-record and on-the-record conversations. They may not be familiar with things like embargoes and exclusives. I think there's less clear lines in the sand around paying them and not paying them. Some influencers are very clear up front that in order to engage with them, they charge a particular fee for certain things. I mean, we've all probably seen those god-awful stats about how much the Kardashians get paid to send out a single tweet. But then there's plenty of folks out there who are looking to build their own profile and are happy to engage at no cost because they see the benefit of, for example, you know, providing a chapter to an ebook because they know that you're going to promote it from the brand. So the way we tackle it at a very, very high level is we look at the universe of influencers. We have a methodology for scoring all of those influencers based on their relevance, if they're engaged with competitors in some way, shape, or form, what their social reach is like, if they're paid or unpaid, and then we come up with individualized strategies for each. I think that's actually a really important point to make, which is there is no one-size-fits-all for influencers. We found that in order to be successful, you really need to look at an influencer program as, 5, 10, or 15 plus individual influencer engagement plans, because some people are going to love being tweeted at, and others are going to want to sit down and meet with you and have more of a formal business discussion before they kind of participate in your program. So it's still all coming together, but it's definitely it's highly individualized.
Final question, and then we're going to let everyone go. Thanks for a little bit of overtime here, and thanks for all the questions. Natasha, Stephanie, Karen, Sarah, others. Here's a question from Sarah. How do you best measure the success ROI of a content piece you have in a local media source? ROI measurement from PR. Has it changed at all?
It's gotten better. So it's not a perfect science, and we often get asked that question. It is much harder for brands to understand the ROI when you're not, for example, putting a lead into the top of the funnel and seeing them convert to a customer at some point down the road. So no, in that there's not kind of a concrete, measurable way, at least that we've found. However, some of the ways we look at it are understanding what outlets are driving traffic back to your website, if that's the case. For some clients with a high-touch sales organization, we work that into, or we work with our clients to have them work that into the prospecting conversations that they have. We love more than anything hearing from a client that they just talked with a hot prospect who saw them in a story that we placed. And then the more expensive way to do it is a perception audit, where you look at before a media and content program, how your brand's perceived among prospective customers and influencers and media, and then 6 months or a year or 2 years later comparing that. It's very labor intensive in terms of interviews and surveys and whatnot, but that's another way some of our clients do it. I think the easiest way is to look at web traffic, and then if you're sharing content on your social, use trackable links so you can understand what traffic's coming back to your site from that material.
Katelyn, so great for you to be with us today. Really enjoyed the presentation. Thanks much.
Thanks for having me, Byron. Appreciate it.
Right on. Great job. Until next month, everyone, I hope your life's a little smarter, better, faster, and wiser, and ready to tackle the savage land of getting the words out and the leads in through PR. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next month.